Hello and welcome to the webinar. My name is Jason Miyasato and I'll be moderating today's webinar. Today, Pendo and Split are joining forces to discuss experiment-led Agile product management. Before we get started, I want to cover a few housekeeping items. First, a recording of this webinar and a copy of the slides will be available tomorrow at Pendo.io and Split.io, and we'll send out an email with links for your reference. Second, questions. We love questions. If you look to the right of your screen, you'll see a Q&A box. Feel free to enter any questions. We'll get to the webinar and we'll get to as many of those as possible. I'll start with introducing today's presenters. We have Trevor Stuart, co-founder and head of product at Split Software. Before Split Software, Trevor was product lead at Salesforce, and prior to that, he worked on product at RelateIQ, which was purchased by Salesforce in 2014. And from Pendo, we have Shannon Bauman, who is VP of Products. Before Pendo, Shannon was co-founder of Spring Metrics, an e-commerce and analytics company. And prior to that, he was product manager at Google, working on Google Groups and AdSense. We'll cover our agenda quickly. First, we'll start with an overview of the co-presenters' companies. We'll follow that up by a few common use cases that Split and Pendo solve for. Then we'll jump into a real example of experiment-led Agile product development, and we'll end with the Q&A. With that, I'll pass it over to Trevor.
Perfect. This is Trevor here from Split. So before we kick off, I'll give a quick overview of Split, who we are, what we do, and what we were founded on. So Split at its core is a feature experimentation platform allowing teams to deliver valuable software faster. How do we do this? There are four key parts to our product. The first is the feature release component. And I'll take a quick step back here and talk a little bit about what is this component. So Split was founded on the foundational principles of feature flags. A feature flag allows, for those of you who don't know, allows customers to be able to release code to say 10% of their customer base. How do they do this? Using that core feature flag, you can essentially use an if-else statement, call Split, set up your definitions in Split's web console, and from there you can decide how you want to target your customer base, whether you want to release a feature for 20% of your customers, 50% of your customers. The second part here is around data collection. Today, Split does this through our Track API, but today we're also integrating with partners such as Pendo, so that you can collect usage data around how are customers using your product, how are they clicking, how are they engaging with it, how are they retaining. You could use other tools such as New Relic Insights to understand page load times, query speed, etc. The third is around data analytics. So we take that data that comes in through tools like Pendo. We automatically attribute it going back to the feature flag. We automatically attribute it to customers that were exposed to 20, 30%, 50%, and give you that quantitative outcome. So we allow you to determine, okay, customers that were exposed to the on treatment or saw this new feature, did they engage with the particular piece of functionality, or did we cause a degradation in the performance? And then the fourth here is focused on product roadmap. So when you can release features quicker, when you can understand the value and the impact they have on your customer base, you can really start to iterate more quickly as a team. And we'll talk about some of these during our use cases of how at Split we're helping teams not only understand the value of their software they're delivering, but also their ability to move quicker. And now I'll hand it over to Shannon, who will talk quickly about Pendo.
Thanks, Trevor. Hey, everyone, I'm Shannon. Thanks for joining us today. So yeah, a quick bit about Pendo. So Pendo combines user insights and analytics with in-app messaging. That helps you understand how your users are using a product, helps you sort of drive behavior. So some classic use cases are onboarding users, announcing and tracking features, and a bunch more. So we collect both qualitative and quantitative data across both web and mobile to help you understand what's going on in your app. Our analytics are retroactive, and that means that we collect every user interaction from the point of install. And the benefit there is that product teams don't need to instrument individual pages and features. They just sort of collect everything and then look at whatever they want to look at when they're ready. And one more thing I'll add, we have powerful segmentation abilities, allowing you to slice and dice your data as you wish. So for example, you could say, I want to segment all of my admin users or my non-admin users, et cetera. And again, that lets you segment your analytics. It also lets you create in-app guides that are targeted at whoever you need to target it to. So let's jump over to the next slide, and we're going to start off this conversation a bit with a quick discussion about product management and sort of the changes that we're seeing in the market. So the first thing I want to talk about is sort of the data-driven model, sort of the change from gut-driven to data-driven. So we as product managers like to think of ourselves as cutting edge, but in all honesty, we're sometimes laggards when it comes to being data-driven. So sales and marketing teams have been doing a lot more data-driven stuff than product management has over the past decade or so. But product management is coming around slowly and making that change. I personally think it's coming mostly from, or started at least from B2C world, them doing sort of large scale data analysis because they have so many more data points, but it's been making its way into the B2B world as well. But that includes everything from doing A/B experimentation and just generally looking at data and usage and trends and things like that to help us sort of formulate or validate our ideas, or for that matter, sometimes just countering the sort of off-the-cuff remarks that executives make and being able to sort of counter that with data. So that's trend number one. The next trend, probably a bunch of you have heard this sort of the notion of Facebook's famous sort of mobile-first mantra. We're seeing that change to more of just a multi-channel. So not thinking about just mobile first, not thinking of just web first, but just having the assumption that people are going to be using a bunch of different devices at the same time. So literally people will have their mobile device up and their web device up and your tablet all at the same time doing multiple different things related to the single app across multiple different devices. So that means PMs are having to think a lot more about, again, not just mobile first, not just web first, but just how are people using your product across multiple different devices. And the last one I'll mention is just SaaS in general, software as a service, subscription-based products. And some of you out there are probably sort of like shaking your heads being like, wow, SaaS, like, isn't the change to SaaS like a decade old? Well, honestly, we're still very much seeing this change happening. We're still seeing some really big companies who are still moving from sort of a single point of sale purchase to a monthly recurring revenue model. And that's still very much ongoing. Still a lot of people who haven't made that change yet. So what does this mean for the expectations from your customers have changed. So they're now expecting sort of constantly improving software. That's sort of the expectation of SaaS. For the PMs, this means sort of ability to put out rough ideas, A/B tests, which is very obviously relevant to this discussion we're having today, and seeing what happens, and also just the ability to iterate on ideas until you really nailed them. So that's sort of some of the big trends we're seeing. Let me sort of jump it back over to Trevor, who's going to talk a little bit about Split plus Pendo and how it relates to everything we've talked about so far.
Awesome, perfect, Shannon. So this slide here, we're going to quickly talk about how when you integrate Split and Pendo, you can power better product decisions. I'm going to start with the chart in the middle. So the chart in the middle, for those of you who already do this today, really talks about how do you release your new pieces of functionality to your customer base. When code reaches production, it then gets into the product manager's hands. We're then often responsible for a successful rollout. That means that the release can't be buggy. It has to have high quality. It has to have certain metrics that it's measured against. It has to have goals that we look to obtain. So I want to quickly talk about the rollout process that we've been doing here at Split, as well as at companies before this, where we were before at LinkedIn and Salesforce, but how we rolled out pieces of functionality. So again, it gets into production. It's sitting at 0%. It's in the off state or control state. Nobody is seeing it. And it's like that because of that feature flag that we talked about on the second or third slide. It's being controlled by that gate. So therefore, it's completely off. It's in production. No one has access to it. You may then quickly decide that you want to turn it on for yourself. You may want to turn it on for your employees. You may want to turn it on for your teammates. You want to quickly release this just to subsets of your team. So maybe you whitelist individuals into the particular treatment. Say you want to turn maybe your employee base into on. You may do that, get their feedback, iterate on it, maybe find some bugs, some usability issues. But then you start to go through that process of saying, well, actually, now I want to take this to 20% of my customers. I want to start to gradually roll it out. You've heard of this. There are possibly terms like gradual rollout, phased rollouts. Again, at the foundation is that feature flag or feature toggle. You turn it on for 20% of your customers. And what are you looking for in that first 20%? In that 20%, you're focused on performance. You're focusing on quality. You want to make sure that when you start to put load on that new piece of functionality, that you don't bring it down, that it doesn't crash, that you don't have a poor experience. In our case, we deal with a significant amount of data like Pendo. Anytime we change anything around that, we roll it out to 10% of our customers to make sure that we aren't spiking CPU load or we aren't causing a degradation in the customer experience. So that's your beginning of the rollout, that 10, 20, 30%. And that's where the PM is obviously probably the most nervous. You're at that stage, you're releasing a new piece of functionality. You get a little anxious because, hey, this is the time that people are starting to see it, and you want to make sure it works. You want to make sure that button is that actually works when it gets clicked. But assuming it all goes well, you then sit there and you say, I'm going to turn this on for 50% of my customers. And this is really where you start to do that experimentation. This is really where you start to understand the ROI of the decisions you made. Were they correct? Does it hit the metrics that you were supposed to hit? When you walked up to your team and said, I'm going to try and drive X metric 10% upwards, this is where you want to start to test it. If you have multiple treatments, it may not be 50%. Let's just use a hypothetical. This is 2 treatments on and off. So I've exposed it now to 50% of my customer base. 50% of my users or accounts, if you're a B2B company, are using this new piece of functionality. And this is where you really start to understand, are they engaging with it? So you probably entered that release with a few things in mind. Did they discover the new piece of functionality? Did they engage with it? Did they continue to retain? Did it impact my key business metrics? Did subscription rates go up? Did churn rates go down? Did engagement on the product, maybe time on site, did that extend? Whatever your metric is that you measure, you're likely comparing this feature release against it. And how are you doing that? And this is where our 2 products really synergize together, which is Pendo allows you to collect all of that data. So Pendo, using their features, and we'll talk about this later about how we did it at Split, Pendo collects all of that feature usage data. So you can start to see who visited it, who clicked this piece of functionality. And we'll talk through some tangible examples. But once you take that data out of Pendo, you send it into Split, we automatically attribute it to customers who are exposed to the on treatment and customers that are exposed to the off treatment. And therefore, we can give you definitive answers that users who were exposed to the on treatment had a lift of X. Now, X is really dependent on what you're measuring and what data you send us, but we can start to give you that statistically significant outcome so that you can understand that the feature release drove an impact on XYZ metric. Now, let's talk about once we've made a decision. We're sitting at 50%. Maybe you tested for 3-4 weeks. Some companies test for a lot longer. Some run experiments for 2+ months. But maybe we let it sit there for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. We made a quick decision. We've looked at the data. We understand which piece of functionality is winning, the on treatment versus the off treatment. And we decide, we're actually going to roll this out to more customers. We've decided, hey, this actually, customers did discover the new piece of functionality. It drove up our key business metrics. It drove up all of our product usage metrics from Pendo. We're going to enable this for more customers. When you start to go from 50 to 100%, you again start to put significant load on the product. So at this point, you're starting to expose 50% more of your customers to it. So we recommend that our customers ramp it from 50 to 75, 80, 90%. And maybe you don't want to turn it on for everybody. Maybe you want to get to 90, 95% of your customer base and just leave it there. We think of that as holdout sets and experimentation. Maybe you want to do just that. This is how we think about integrating our 2 products. So just to summarize, Split gives you that capability to release functionality to subsets of your population. You can complement that with data coming in from Pendo so that you can understand engagement, usage, and be able to make those decisions around, did it have the desired outcome, and are you shipping more valuable software? We'll talk about a few different use cases here. The first one will be a trial experience, how you can talk about our 2 products. The second one will be focused on just general feature releases, rollouts, and analytics. And the third will be focused on how do you use this data to drive continual improvement across your product. So as I mentioned, the first one, we'll dive right in here, and then I'll hand it over to Shannon. The first one is around trial experience. So oftentimes we've seen a lot of our customers and PM teams use our products to essentially alter that onboarding experience. So how do you think about showing a new piece of functionality to, maybe you want to show it just to your trial customers first, or maybe you want to show it just to your paid customers, or maybe you want to show it to 50% of your trial customers. You can see in this diagram down here, this is how Split's web console operates. You essentially define who you want to show this new piece of functionality to. In this example here, we're showing it if the user has plan type trial, we're actually giving them the on treatment. If their plan type is paid, we're showing them the off treatment. This goes back to earlier where I talked about that feature flag. This is purely a definition that is used in that evaluation. So you release this functionality, you want to understand the impact it's having. Let's talk quickly about an example that one of our customers here at Split is Twilio. A few of you may know it. When Twilio first adopted Split, they used us in the onboarding flow. It was an easy entry point. They started testing out our functionality. And what they were trying to understand, and for those of you that know Twilio's business, they have multiple products. And over the course of that onboarding experience, they like to mix it up. They like to try different flows, and all with the hopes of driving up one key metric. Can they get customers to adopt multiple SKUs and essentially purchase more at the checkout point. So they use Split to iterate on this, testing different treatments, different flows, different percent allocations, so redirecting traffic to understand how they were measuring the metrics that mattered most to them in this particular experiment, which was in their case, the adoption of their product usage or their product feature set. And now I'll hand it over to Shannon, who will talk a little bit about how you can use Pendo as well in the onboarding and trial experience.
Great. So trial experience is definitely a core use case of Pendo. It touches on so many pieces of our platform, from guides to analytics and so forth. So clearly, you can create in-app guidance to help new users and trial users flow through your product. That's similar to onboarding. So again, helping them know where to go, how to use the product from the get-go. Surveying is also a really big piece of this. So getting their feedback, helping, trying to understand where they're getting stuck and so forth. And then one thing to note, so we often talk about Pendo as being for product managers and product teams. The trial experience use case is an interesting one because not only do product teams clearly care about the trial experience, sales and marketing teams do as well. So here at Pendo, for example, we have our sales team. They'll when a new user signs up for Pendo, they'll track that individual user. So right where the product team is tracking sort of in aggregate, how is the trial experience working? A salesperson might be looking at an individual account that signed up and helping them understand what's going on there. So really cool use cases possible there. One great actual customer sort of use case that I'll highlight, that image at the bottom, is from ShareFile. ShareFile is a product of Citrix, and they do sort of file sharing and file storage type activities. So ShareFile used Pendo to understand in their trial experience using analytics, what are sort of the main tasks that people are doing during the trial. And those were sharing large files, sending encrypted emails, and uploading files to the cloud. So again, that's sort of the main task that this specific product, the main task that a user would use in this specific product. But anyhow, so they knew those tasks. They then built guides to let users sort of choose from those tasks and then assisted them in completing these tasks. And by doing this, they were able to increase their trial conversion rate by 11%, which is has significant value to their bottom line there, the top line, I guess, rather. But so that's sort of the first path. But you could imagine in a future version then A/B testing to optimize this even more. So A/B testing those guides, A/B testing their user flow. But again, that's sort of that cycle of try things, test it, measure it, et cetera, and constantly sort of improving that flow and the flow of your product. So back over to you, Trevor, for the next use case.
Perfect. Yeah, let's talk about the second use case. So if you flip to the next slide. So the second one is focused really on feature rollouts and general analytics. So how do you think about rolling out pieces of functionality to a percentage of your customer base? I'm just waiting for the slide to change over here.
Yeah, we're having a
Shannon, are you getting
little technical difficulty. We're working on it here.
Oh, perfect. Well, I'll continue anyways, and then when the slide catches up, you guys will all see it. So the second use case really plays, there we go, to the core functionality that Split provides, which is how do you think about feature rollouts and complementing it with analytics? We talked about how do you decipher and kind of show different experiences for trial customers versus paid customers on the prior use case, or maybe you want to optimize the trial experience, but it's not all the time that we're playing with our trial experience. Maybe that's one team within your particular company. The rest of your team is focused on new pieces of functionality. They're focused on improving existing pieces of functionality. And so here at Split, we often, obviously, we roll out everything behind Split. So there's a bunch of new stuff that you can't see in our product today. One of those things we'll talk about in the appendix here towards the end. But as you think about feature rollouts, Split allows new teams to release new functionality to targeted customers. So we talked about that use case earlier of rolling out to 20% of your customers. But maybe you actually want to roll out to 20% of your customers, but you want to exclude beta customers, or you want to include beta customers, but exclude high value accounts. Maybe you want to only show it to your beta customers. That's the capability that Split provides. But we then allow you, as I mentioned earlier, to pair that with data from other tools. So in this case with Pendo, we can bring in data such as NPS survey results, or maybe you want to do scores that are coming in from different products, or it's something as simple from Pendo as that usage data that they're collecting. How do you essentially pair that and attribute it to customers that are exposed to different versions? Now, in this case, I'll talk about these three kind of small examples here. If we were collecting in Pendo reports run per user, maybe we were firing an event when they clicked the button that said reports run, we can very quickly attribute for you who was exposed to the on or the off treatment and give you definitive answers such as, well, when we compared these two treatments, we saw a 41% decline in reports run per user. The right metric there is around task creation. Maybe it's a similar event within Pendo that when you click a button or when you create a task, you're firing that event. And we can tell you that users who were exposed to the particular treatment, again, maybe those beta customers, they had an 11.34% lift in task creation. Now, if these are metrics that you care about, obviously these are going the opposite direction. So maybe this tells you that you don't want to release this piece of functionality. But the last one here is also around new user survey scores. So when users, or new user survey completion rates in this case, when they completed the survey, what was the score they sent in? You can measure metrics such as that, or you can just see, did they even complete? Was there an abandonment rate? Being able to understand that. You use all of these metrics that you're collecting to make an informed decision. Obviously, with every feature release, some metrics will go up, some metrics will go down, some won't change in a significant way. And that's where Split really helps you understand the difference across these metrics so that you can make an informed decision and understand what metrics mattered most for that release. Now, Shannon, do you want to quickly talk through some of the data collection on the Pendo side?
Cool, yep. So the image you're seeing down at the bottom there is a feature that at Pendo we call goals. And as the name hopefully alludes to, that's essentially setting a goal for a feature launch. That's exactly what this is for. So the idea is you as a product team, you're about to launch a feature. Presumably there's some reason you're launching this feature, right? You've got a business goal. It's maybe to increase the trial conversion rate. Maybe it's to reduce churn. Who knows what? Maybe it's just increased usage of some core piece of functionality in your product. So by using this goals feature, you can say, my goal is whatever, maybe 50% of my customers use this feature within the first month or something, and track it. So that is a core piece of like understanding how the usage is going, understanding if you're meeting your goals. Then clearly, if you're not meeting your goals, you want to do something about that. And this gets back into the experiment-led agile product management, obviously. So experiment on that and iterate and make changes, right? Run A/B tests and try to change those numbers. One thing I'll also add here is sometimes what we need to do is just even tell people about that feature. So, I think we often forget that, we have, marketing messaging about it. We have maybe release notes. And even with like so many of these touch points, sometimes users still don't even know this feature exists. We had one of our customers, Site Comply, who built a guide, a pretty simple guide, just telling their users about this one core piece of feature that they had. Because they felt that it had a lot of value and they were seeing that people weren't using it. And by adding this one simple guide, they got a 2,000% increase. Yes, 2,000%, which is just a ludicrous number. But again, it just reinforces the idea that like, okay, let's start and make sure people even know this exists. And then once we know that it exists, then if people aren't using it, then yes, let's start, iterating, A/B testing, etc. So that was a pretty cool use case that we came across. Just wanted to share with you guys. Back to you, Trevor.
And the final use case here is around kind of how do you continue, and we talked about this on the second and third slide, is how do you continue to move quicker, right? As a product team, engineering team, we're oftentimes asked how can we get functionality out as quick as possible, but we're also held to incredibly high bars around it has to be nearly perfect. Customers have to like it, they have to engage with it, it has to react quickly. On our end, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to maintain very quick SLAs in how we respond and how we show data in our web console. How do you do that quickly, right? How do you get more pieces of functionality out, more features out while maintaining that high bar? And that's really, if you kind of think back to the very first concept we talked about, which was that feature flag, using that feature flag, you can get features to production quicker. So you can get code in a 60, 70% state to production in a quicker cadence. Here at Split, there are probably about now 6, 7 new pieces of functionality sitting in production that are all at different stages. Some are at 50% complete, some are at 70%, some are at 90 and already starting to be beta tested with a few customers. So how do you think about increasing your deployment velocity and getting your features to production as quick as possible? I'll quickly talk here about one of our customers. WePay, a subsidiary of JP Chase. When they first adopted Split, they adopted us less for the experimentation, that was their end goal in mind, but they adopted us so that they could essentially get their code to production as quick as possible. By using Split, they were able to go from a 2-week deployment cycle down to daily, and they were able to do that because they didn't have to worry about all of the engineers pushing their code to production in those 2-week sprints, they were able to merge it in the controller off state, get it into production, start iterating, turning it on for themselves, turning it on for their employees, turning it on for their beta customers, and be able to get feedback quicker. So in today's modern software delivery, it's all about how do we iterate quicker, it's all about how do we get feedback quicker, and how do we understand that we are delivering valuable software faster. We've talked a lot in the previous slides around understanding the value of the software you're delivering. And for Split, this last one is about how do we allow you to do it quicker? How do we allow you to do it faster? So that's where the core feature flagging technology comes in that allows you to get that code to production and only turn it on for yourself, and allows you to decrease the time to production in the case of WePay from 2 weeks to daily. Now I'll turn it over to Shannon, who will talk a little bit more about Pendo as it pertains to product improvement.
Cool. So yeah, for product improvements, there's one small item I want to sort of draw attention to is Guide Center. So we have this ability in Pendo to sort of create this learning center, an education center inside of your product, and that can be targeted at users to keep educating them. So, the education piece is a really interesting piece that some people or customers of Pendo don't even know about that functionality, but just hugely powerful to help sort of educating your customers. But I also wanted to talk quickly about a really cool customer story. The customer is MemberClicks, and there's a really cool write-up that our marketing team did about this on our website, so head on over there and read the full thing if you get a chance. It's great. But the TLDR, the too long didn't read version of it, is that they installed Pendo, and they were surprised to find out that a very large, there was a lot of usage of this very simple search mechanism they had in their product. So people were using the search feature a ton. And they were a little surprised by that, because that it shouldn't be the case. People should be able to get to their content that they want fast without having to search a bunch of times to do so. So what they did is they started optimizing that. They started running A/B tests around that functionality, trying different experiments, trying to see how people were using it. And then after they'd run an experiment, they would wait for somebody to use that new version B, version C, 7 times or more. Once they hit 7 times, they would serve up a Pendo guide that was a questionnaire asking them about that experience. How did they like this new experience, et cetera. And they were getting 70% response rates of those surveys, which for any of you who've sort of done in-app surveys before, surveys in general, realize that's an astounding number. And sort of a quick sidebar here. I'll comment that, yeah, like when you start targeting people, very sort of narrowly targeting them, in this case, it's like targeting people who have used a certain feature more than a certain number of times. The content of that guide is very targeted, right? It says like, we've noticed you use this new feature a bunch of times, we'd love your feedback. So when you have these very targeted conversations with customers, you get really, really high response rates. So anyhow, quick aside there. So they kept iterating, and then once they got to a version of their product that reduced the need to use this search, they then went to the 100%, like what Trevor talked about in one of his earlier slides, right? You iterate, and then you just crank it all the way up once it's good. And so that's what they did, and they saw a 40% drop in usage of the search functionality, which again, drop in their use case is a good thing. They wanted to reduce the usage of this search. So yeah, that was a really cool use case. Back over to you, Trevor.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I think at this point, we're going to move on to a quick demo. We're going to talk a little bit about an experiment that we've been running on our end the last couple of weeks. We actually published a blog post on this yesterday, so you can quickly see it. The feature here is starring. So starring, super simple. Oftentimes we take it for granted. You can read the blog post again. Would love to get the team's feedback at some point if you guys are users of Split around which feature set you liked more. But let's talk about why we did this. So as a product team, one of our large goals this quarter and next quarter is around service for larger organizations. So how do we work with bigger and bigger teams? So I have one message for doing that around isolation, allowing customers to find what is relevant to them quicker. One basic concept is starring. So in this case, we wanted to try 2 different patterns. This was purely a visual treatment, right? We used this in the JavaScript layer using our JavaScript SDK. We very quickly, this was a last minute thing. We decided, hey, let's actually decide to do 2 different treatments here. On the left side, we called this version star small. This was, you can see right below, we call this the metadata at Split. It's the object below the name and the description. So the Split name here was starring. The description says as part of the isolation enhancements. And then underneath that, you have that metadata object. This is very similar to the design pattern that we took from Sumo Logic. We took it from Slack. So for those of you on this call who are on Slack, they do have stars. You can star different channels. It's a relatively small star, though. It's not huge. It's not in the title, or at least it's not for me. So maybe they're experimenting with me. On the right side here is a different design pattern. It's a large star. We took this design pattern from tools like Datadog, and here you can see the star is the predominant item. And when we asked the team, okay, we're going to release this piece of functionality, we started thinking about, we wanted to measure two different metrics. We wanted to measure, well, did they see it, right? Did they discover this new piece of functionality? And after they discovered it, did they continue to use it? And we'll continue on to the results in a second, but it may surprise you in terms of not just discoverability, but also did they continue to use it and which one did they engage with more? So if we go on to the next slide, we'll talk about where we collected this data. So on the previous slide, we talked about releasing it. We released it to 50% of our customers using Split's feature flag. 50% went into the small treatment, 50% went into the large treatment. And then we complemented the data with Pendo. So we fired a few events in Pendo. The first was Split starred, and the second was Split unstarred. These were two actions that users were taking. And we took that data from Pendo. We then sent it to Split. So if you see on the next slide, we sent it to Split as an event within. And then we defined a metric, and we created several of these. So we created probably for this release around 8 to 10 different metrics, measuring not only did they click it, but how many times did they click it, what percentage of users clicked it, and then you'll see how this filters down in the experiment, but what percent clicked it, how many times did they do it, how many stars did they end up accumulating, were there more small stars than big stars, how often were they engaged with. We did this all by using not only the tracking event that's fired in Pendo, but Split's metric builder. So we're able to come in here and say, well, where do you want this metric to go? Do you want it to increase or decrease? Do you want to see this across all of your users or per user? Do you want to look at the percent of unique users who actually took this action? You could see other metrics here. If I had put up another picture, you could see the total number of clicks. You could see the number of users, not just the percent. You could even see a value if you were sending me in a value for that field. And you could also set filter by to do things like such as only measure this if the user has taken X action. So we not only, so just to recap before we get into the results, we use Split to essentially gate which treatment we showed, so whether it was a large star or a small star. We then fired tracking events through Pendo, and we send the tracking events into Split where we created a series of metrics that allowed us to understand not only did they discover it, but did they continue to engage with it. So on the next slide here is the results. So from this experiment, you'll see that we were focused on two things. As you may have imagined, on discoverability, the large star won out. So fewer users discovered or clicked the star when it was smaller. So the percent of users using stars was 13% lower for the small star versus the large star, but in the number of users who have starred was 18% lower. So this kind of plays to the thesis. Bigger star, people will engage with it, they'll see it, they'll discover it. But what really kind of kicked us and allowed us to make the decision was, well, when they noticed it, did they continue to use that piece of functionality? So what we noticed was for those users that starred, they starred a lot of small stars. They didn't star a lot of big stars. So you can see key metrics here, such as number of stars per user was 64% higher when they were exposed to small stars. So they continued to re-engage with it. The number of star clicks was 16% higher. The number of stars per user with stars, I know it seems it's a tongue twister there, but that was 89% higher. And just in general, we had 54% more small stars than we did large stars. Now, this kind of played to the thesis of, well, we made it smaller, so maybe it would be harder to discover, but I don't think anyone on our team expected that the small stars would drive this significant of an engagement over those larger stars. So what did we decide? At the end of the blog post, you'll see, and we actually turned it on yesterday, we enabled small stars for 100% of our customers. This is a very simple use case, but it really highlights the power of kind of feature experimentation when you combine not only the feature flagging capability to release to subsets of your population, but also the analytics and the tracking capabilities from Pendo. And as you can imagine, how did we make this announcement? How did we announce to our customers that they are now receiving a small star and inform them of our results? Well, we popped a Pendo widget. We are customers here at Split of Pendo, so we use the in-app announcement to tell our customers, hey, this is the results of the experiment, and you are now all seeing. Perfect. So that's the example on our end. I think the next slide is a quick example here on Q&A. So if there are any questions, I'll turn it over to Jason, unless Shannon, you have anything to add.
No, I'm good. I'm excited to hear the questions.
Great. All right. Thanks, Shannon. Thanks, Trevor. The first question we have is, what are the best use cases for feature flags?
Best use cases for feature flags. Shannon, I presume I'll take that one. So Best use cases for feature flags are a lot of what we talked about. So not only those feature rollouts, so maybe you want to release a new piece of functionality to a subset of your customer base, but also just being able to manipulate your customer experience, being able to try different versions. We also use them here at Split for bug fixes. So if we have an issue, we put the bug fix behind the Split so that I can get it to production as quick as possible. And therefore I can start to turn on for myself, verify that the issue we had is corrected. But those are all additional use cases. The feature flag is a very powerful piece of technology, very simple in nature. It's an if-else statement in your application code, but there's a lot of different applications for that. Some are feature releases, some are allowing you to do bug fixes, some are allowing you just to get your release cadence down from 2 weeks to daily.
Great, thanks, Trevor. Next question is, tell us about a product experiment that changed the direction of a product release. I think that's probably for you, Shannon.
Yeah, I mean, Trevor, you might have one as well, but I can actually think of an example we had. We did an experiment, like sort of a very, very low cost experiment. Probably some of you have heard of this idea. Is essentially like put out something before anything's built and just see how it goes, right? Just put out essentially like a fake link, a fake whatever, and just see how people react to it. So we did that, just put out sort of like the fake version, see how people interact with it. And it turned out we had much, much lower usage of it than we expected. So honestly, we essentially just scrapped the entire project and just saved us immense amount of time, immense amount of engineering time. And as you all know, engineering time is so rare around here. So yeah, just thinking creatively about before you even build anything, what kind of experimentation can you do in your live product to see if things are necessary at all.
Yeah, and I think the one thing I would add there is when you use the feature flag and you get into that experimentation mindset, you don't have to build the features 100%. Oftentimes we get into this mindset of it has to be perfect before it's released. That's not always the case. Maybe we want to enable this for 10% of our customers, 20%. It doesn't have to be perfect. You can get that MVP out there and make those decisions quicker.
Great, thanks. Another question, I think for Trevor, you talked about a holdout set that may never get a particular feature. Why would you do that?
Yeah, so as you think about, I mean, there's the classic example I heard 1-2 years ago, and it may not be true anymore, is that there are certain users of Facebook in this world who never got chat. And you may do that because you want to essentially test different pieces of functionality, and you need a subset of your population that isn't being impacted by other experiments being run or other features. So users who may never be exposed to a certain piece of functionality may behave differently than customers who have gotten used to that piece of functionality. Holdout sets are they're more common as you get deeper into experimentation, but that would be kind of the general logic is around your user behavior and user patterns.
Great, makes sense. Okay, we have another one. So this question is, we've experimented, we're happy. What is the path to making a feature generally available? They say, do you just leave in logic in place, remove the unwanted else in favor of the if code block?
Yeah, these are great questions. So we talked on, like, I think it was the third or fourth slide, we talked about that kind of release process. And I'll give a quick plug to one of our advisors, Yashu from LinkedIn. She wrote a paper, if you just Google SQR, speed, quality, and risk, and add LinkedIn and Yashu in the title, you'll see that she talks a lot about that chart. But that is really the process of releasing it to 20–30% of your customers, making your decision when you get to around 50%, releasing it further, getting it to general availability, 100% of your customers. And now what do you do about kind of that cleanup of that code? So you've put that if-else statement in your code. How do you go about cleaning that up? At Split, we're starting to think forward about how can we help with this so that you don't have a bunch of these if-else statements in your code. One of my co-founders kind of made a quick recommendation and tweeted that, we can actually start to enforce the number of feature flags or experiments that you can have running at any given point in time. So maybe you can only have 50 experiments at any given point in time, and this would be set by your organization so that it requires the cleanup of those if-else statements. Now, how would you actually do it? What we did with starring, since for those of you who were listening in earlier, starring is now flipped to 100% small. I've assigned a ticket using Jira to my front-end team. They'll do a cleanup of that split. They'll remove the other treatment. So they'll essentially remove that if-else statement and that get treatment call, only leaving the small star treatment in the code base. And next time that goes through to production, our feature flag will stop receiving traffic. So we will no longer be getting called to make those evaluations. you'll see that in our web console. It'll say we haven't received an evaluation for this feature in 7+ days, and then we'll just go and delete the feature within Split.
Great, thanks, Trevor. Shannon, this one looks to be to you. Can Pendo be understood as Google Analytics with more granular measures?
Yeah, I mean, I see Pendo as essentially being an analytics product specifically for applications. So Google Analytics was built for the ground up for marketing sites, honestly. Pendo is built for the ground up for applications, for web products that have users logging in, accounts, users, and things of that sort. So it's definitely much more tailor-made for sort of web applications and mobile applications, whereas Google, again, is built for marketing sites. But yeah, we can definitely chat with you much more about that whenever with our sales team, with our marketing team, et cetera. Happy to chat more about it.
Okay, great. Here's one that just came in. How many of your customers are using feature flagging indefinitely to give some limit to users or some limit for modules?
Yeah, so I presume that you're referring to, and I could be interpreting this a few different ways, and I'll let Shannon kind of explain a little bit more around. If you're referring to Pendo's module, being able to segment your population and release that module to subsets of your customer base, like those guides and those announcements, you can do that in Pendo. You can essentially segment down the population that you want to show this piece of functionality to, or that module to. Within Split, oftentimes we are used for kind of, if you think of a module instead as a component of a page, so maybe you're releasing a new element on a page, people do use Split for that. Everything at the end of the day, when we say feature, or you use that term feature flag, it's really just a representation of a few lines of code. In the simplistic form, we call that a feature. So that's kind of the general gist. A lot of people do use it for kind of just putting modules on a page for announcing new pieces of functionality. But those are all kind of different ways you could use that feature flag. In some cases, the feature flag is permanent. Some people may use that feature flag and continue to iterate on it through what you may think of as like configurations, dynamic configurations, so that you can change the content of that module without any sort of code deploy. But again, it really depends on if you're referring to kind of the guides that Pendo is using, or if you're thinking about something that's really in application.
Great, thanks, Trevor. I think that is all of the questions that I've seen. Oh, there's one more that just came in. So this person is about to engage in an early adopter program on search. They flipped their homegrown feature flag, but with Pendo, is there documentation that helps them capture the search queries?
So yeah, we'll follow up with this asker offline. So yeah, there's some mechanisms to capture some search query stuff. I actually, to be honest, don't know if there's documentation about it or not, but yeah, we'll follow up with you offline on that.
Okay.
You missed the best part of that, Jason. They said they'd rather use Split for the feature flag.
I was trying to be shamelessly not plugged, but.
Awesome.
Well, I think we've gone through all of our questions. So with that, we'll wrap. Again, these recordings will be available on both Split and Pendo's web properties. And thank you, Shannon and Trevor, for today. We really appreciate it. And thank every attendee for joining the webinar.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for dialing in.
Thanks all. Have a great one.